Welcome back to Esteemed Viewers to another edition of God Manifold Wisdom. I'm Pastor Kevin Afaxed, and if it's the first time for tuning in, it's a pleasure. Consider liking this video, sharing it with a friend, and subscribing to this channel. You can also hit the notification bell icon so that whenever we upload a new video, it may come your way. Today we want to look at the part 2 of a topic we began a while ago, and which is how and why Africa came to be dominated and pillaged by the Caucasian white oppressors, and its soon liberation by its great savior prophesied about in Isaiah 19:19-22. Now, if you can remember where we left off at in the part 1, we saw how Africa, or the Egyptians, the black Africans, the ones who descended from Ham, how we are actually the ones who enslaved the Israelites at the time of the Exodus, at the time of Moses and all that, which you find in the Bible. So because we enslaved them, and we find that in Genesis chapter 15 verse 13 to 16, that the very Abraham was told that the nation that shall enslave your physical posterity shall be made to suffer similar repercussions. And that is why we found out that Africans also had to undergo slavery and oppression and domination. But we had to ask ourselves, how can Africans, or the Egyptians, the black Africans, the ones who descended from Ham, how could they be taken in slavery? Yet we saw clearly that we had the highly advanced, complex, superior civilization at a time when the Caucasians, the white men, were naked and in caves. So how could it be that we could find ourselves also being enslaved? Then we saw that God had to do that which he did to Nebuchadnezzar, as we read in Daniel chapter 4 verse 31 there, all the way, whereby Daniel mentions very well in the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar, who was a king, and when he tried to exalt himself, God lowered him in a way that for 7 years he was eating grass, and he grew hair, and he had clothes. So we understand that he had a severe case of amnesia, whereby he forgot himself. He lost his senses completely, and he was only restored back after seven years, and restored back to a higher level than he was previously. So we have seen that that is actually what God had to do with the Africans, with the black Africans, that our intelligence that we use, that sophisticated intelligence we used to erect the pyramids, that was taken away from us, and we found ourselves like the Bushmen and all that. And it is during such a situation, when we are having our senses and our knowledge totally wiped off from us, that is when now, when you're having these invasions now of Africa, by like the Phoenicians have invaded Africa, the Greeks, the Berber tribes, the Romans, the Arabs. And at the time when there was the Arab invasion, then you see, with all these invasions, Africans were just pushed further south to go into the sub-Sahara, finding themselves in the equatorial rainforest and all that, the savanna, the grasslands and all that. So that is how Africans came to find themselves in I'm talking about the black Africans came to find themselves in the geographical places where they are as it is. So it is now from the sub-Sahara that now Japheth, because understand, the Egyptians who are from Ham enslaved the Israelites who are from Shem, and for the Egyptians who are from Ham to pay, they had to pay by being also taken slaves by who? By the Caucasians, the white men who are from Japheth. So Japheth came now and took the black men, the Africans, into slavery in the 15th to 19th century during the North African slave trade and the transatlantic slave trade. We understand that approximately 12 to 15 million Africans were sold as slaves. The ones who built the America, they were taken to the Caribbean, taken to North America, South America, Europe and all that. And during this transportation, it is estimated by official records that 1.2 to 2.4 million Africans died even during transit, in transportation, because of the unconducive conditions of transportation. Now, this is just part of the legacy of slavery whereby we found Africans, or the Egyptians, the black men, the ones at the posterity of Ham. This is what they went through at that particular time. Now, when the slave trade or this was abolished, something else it morphed. It took another shape to the time now of the European colonization. And in 1884, in the Berlin Conference, all these the Europeans, the colonizers, the colonial overlords, came together, met, discussed. Everyone took their share of the African cake. And in the scramble and partition of Africa, we know what happened, what ensued there. If I just mention a case study, we can consider someone who actually many people are oblivious of, and his history, his very unpalatable legacy has not been shared to many people, and that is someone like Leopold II, who at one point in time he owned the entire Congo, belonging to one man. The time when he was calling it Congo Free State, and it is not known, as people always say that of the Holocaust by Hitler killing very many people, but they've never really realized that someone like Leopold II killed approximately 10 to 15 million Congolese during his tenure, during the time whereby he was exercising despotic and inhumane rule over the Congolese, putting them into hard labor, into forced labor, committing crimes against humanity and injustices, whereby if they don't bring the amount of rubber that he wants, he'll even amputate them. Others were emasculated, even and dismembered as it is. So all these things happened in African soil during that time of the European colonization, and that is just an example with the Leopold II of Belgium. We have also during the First World War, the Second World War, black men, Africans, were taken to fight alongside their colonial masters, and they had the audacity to fight the war, even in the African soil, whereby black men gave the ultimate prize by dying because of their colonial masters. So these are things that are in common knowledge, and which a lot of you are aware of. And the purpose of this edition of God Manifold Wisdom is not to elucidate on every nitty-gritty, but just to mention a few things in passing. Now, if we forge forward, we'll understand that it is during now the time of the independence, actually the rapid decolonization of Africa, as there was already agitation from the black men to have self-independence, where they could have full autonomy. Now, you know that full autonomy never came, because what happened with the rapid decolonization, for example, in the case of the French colonies, we find that the French were very clever. They never wanted to just leave their colonies like that and go. What they did, they actually coerced and even obliged the colonies that before they could get any independence, as you're putting it, political in quotes, they were supposed to sign a pact for the continuation of colonization, something that was basically introducing the French colonial currency of the CFA, whereby we have the West African CFA and the Central African CFA. This is basically paying colonial tax, whereby these 14 countries, actually the 12 which are colonized by it, have to deposit into the French central bank 85% of their foreign exchange reserves. This is atrocious. This is actually unheard of. And to even think that it is taking place to date, we can basically see that this is neocolonialism at its zenith. This is how many African countries have been exploited up to now. It's part of the history of the black man. It's part of the history even of their oppression, of their sufferings, which they're still undergoing even up to the present age. Now, just to mention something that, and I want to quote a former French president, Francois Mitterrand. He said, "Without Africa, France will have no history in the 21st century." Another French president, retired president, Jacques Chirac, said, if we had to be honest and acknowledge that a big part of the money in our banks comes from the exploitation of Africa. Which Africa these French colonies are exploited? We have these French big companies like Total, Arriva, and you even know concerning the Elf scandal, all the things that ensued. And whenever any country will want to come out of this repressive regime through their colonial tax and colonial currency. We find an example of Jean Badel Bokassa, who was overthrown by the French military, Jean Badel Bokassa of the Central African Republic. We have people like Silvano Solimpi of Togo, who was assassinated. We have Thomas Isadore Noel Sankara of Burkina Faso. We know he was assassinated. Every time you try to criticize this colonial currency, these are the repercussions that the black African leaders faced. We have someone like Modibo Keita of Mali, who faced a coup, overthrown and all that. You know, someone like Sekou Touré of Guinea-Conakry, whereby there was a sabotage when they wanted to come out of that. You know what the French did in Mali and in Guinea-Conakry, a sabotage whereby they really, because they really removed all the infrastructure they had put forth. These are atrocities, and if you look at it, that they are taking place in our day and age. It is something that is actually atrocious. So moving forward, just to mention something interesting that happened and not too far ago, the Deputy Prime Minister of Italy, Luigi Di Maio, actually mentioned something, and this was stark transparency. What he did, he said that the reason of the immigration, whereby you're finding that black men are crossing the Mediterranean and entering into Europe every year, year in, year out. He said the reason of that massive migration of black men crossing the Mediterranean to seek even asylum, to seek refuge, probably in Europe. He said it's because of the blatant exploitation and pillaging of Africa by France. This is something that struck up a diplomatic war, because he said it is, if these people could have not come to Europe, if they're not being impoverished back home by France through their colonial currency, whereby African countries, which I cannot say they are former French colonies because they're actually still colonies. This is neocolonialism. They are still paying tax to their colonial master. This is happening in our day. It is very saddening. Now, this is why many or several attempts have been made towards liberating Africa. And remember, I don't want you to lose track of what you're talking about. We're talking about how and why Africa came to be dominated and pillaged by the Caucasian or white oppressors, and its own liberation by its great savior prophesied about in Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19 to 22, so that you may know what you're talking about. God already knew these things will happen to Africans, and he has a solution for it, and the solution is in Isaiah 19 to 22. Now, understand that many Africans have tried to look for solutions to see how this pillaging can stop, how this domination can stop, how this oppression, how this despotic totalitarian rule of the white supremacists who have basically subjugated the entire continent and even considered it to be dark continent. Now, many people have tried. We had Pan-Africanists like the Kwame Nkrumahs and all that, and the Haile Selassie and people like that, who thought that Africa could get a breakthrough if only Africa could become one, so that they should no longer be the nationalist, but they should have a Pan-African approach to it. That was one thing that was posited as a possible solution of liberation. Another thing is what we know, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, the late, what he tried to put on a United States of Africa. And you know what he faced from the NATO forces. He was basically killed in a very inhumane way. Another thing, we have other people have talked about, maybe it is a matter of invoking ancestral spirits to come to liberate us or to emancipate us from the fetters of the colonial or the neocolonial masters. No, that is also something that has been posited, but which cannot bring any fruition. And more recently, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, whereby there's no boundaries, whereby there can be intra-African trade and all that, and whereby Africa can get economic independence or freedom and all that. That is also a good thing with the African single African passport, and with all the things that have been posited with that, which is also a pilot program for the African Union Vision 2063. That is also something that has been posited, which looks lucrative. But just to tell you that that is not the true liberation of Africa that has been prophesied about in Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19 to 22. That must take the great Savior prophesied about in that verse, and that is what we'll be dealing with in the part 3 that will be coming up. Thank you for being with us in this edition. Wait for the part 3. Like this video, share it with a friend, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment in the comment section. We, the God Manifold Wisdom community, will love to hear from you. Thank you, and God bless you.